I inherited this land from my grandfather, and I'll be damned if I let a bunch of polo shirt bureaucrats tell me what to do with it. 9 acres of rough Texas soil, iron-fenced and gated, sitting on a rise just east of town. There's a certain kind of peace you only get when your driveway is a quarter-mile long and ends with your name on a steel plate. I've got my workshop here, my dogs, my tools, and enough space between me and the next living soul that I can drink coffee in my underwear, and nobody calls the sheriff. Or at least, that used to be true. The problem started the moment Riverbend Estates bloomed across the road like a prefab infection. They popped up those pastel boxes in under a year, stacked neatly behind a white stucco wall and a decorative sign with cursive letters. Looked like a gated utopia for people afraid of the world they left behind. And running the whole show was Karen Sterling, president of the Homeowners Association, or as she calls herself at public meetings, the steward of community order. To me, she looked like the kind of woman who thought rules were sacred as long as she wrote them herself. At first, we ignored each other. I had no reason to care what they did, and they had no business on my land. The issue was, the eastern half of their community backed into dense brush and rocky terrain. The only logical access route, for builders, landscapers, movers, was straight through my southern gate and down the gravel road my grandfather laid by hand in 1967. They wanted it. I said no. Simple as that. It wasn't like they didn't ask nicely. At first, I got a certified letter last spring offering me $50,000 for a permanent easement across my land. I sent it back with a sticky note that just said, "No thanks." They sent a follow-up offering $75,000, then $100,000. The answer didn't change. What they didn't understand, what they still don't understand, is that I don't care about money. I care about control. And giving an inch to people like that means watching them build a highway across your spine. Then came the visit. It was just past 7 in the morning, the kind of early that smells like dew and diesel. I was checking the belts on a tractor out by the shed when I noticed a pair of high-vis vests by the gate. 2 guys standing next to a black Suburban, one with a clipboard, the other with a smug look like he knew something I didn't. I walked down, wiping my hands on a rag. Before I could ask anything, the one with the clipboard spoke. "Morning, sir. We're with Riverbend Community Logistics. We need temporary access through your gate, just for a few days. Some equipment deliveries." I raised an eyebrow. "This gate?" "Yes, sir," the other one chimed in. "Would save us a lot of time and hassle going around. We've got concrete trucks scheduled for Friday. Your route's the only direct access. It'd mean a lot to the community." I shook my head slowly. "This road isn't on your plans. It's not public. It's on my deed. You know that." "Just temporary," Clipboard insisted. "We can make it worth your while." I folded my arms. "I've already told Karen and your HOA that I'm not interested. This isn't a logistics problem. It's a boundaries problem." That's when the friendly tone evaporated. "You might regret that," Clipboard said quietly, flipping a page on his folder. "The HOA is exploring legal avenues for a temporary easement. Emergency access justification, community interest." I laughed once. "You're threatening to take my land through legal gymnastics because I won't open a gate?" "No threats, sir," the other one said, suddenly formal. "Just outcomes. Nobody wants a drawn-out legal fight." "Well," I said, reaching into my vest pocket and pulling out my phone, "you're standing on private property without consent. That's trespassing. I'd say this conversation is over." I hit the speed dial for the sheriff's non-emergency line. The look on their faces turned just cold enough to tell me they weren't bluffing. They left before the deputy arrived, tires crunching like bones under that shiny Suburban. I gave the sheriff a report, just for the record. He nodded, unimpressed, and said something about overzealous suburban types. but I could see it in his eyes. He knew this wasn't the end. The next morning, I found HOA pamphlets wedged into my gate hinges and tucked into the mailbox, glossy paper accusing me of endangering public safety and blocking infrastructure development. They even had a QR code linking to a website called riverbendprogress.org with a big red banner that said, "He's putting us all at risk." I didn't flinch. I reinforced the gate with a second locking bracket, added another camera to the east fence line, and updated the entry system with a biometric reader I picked up off a buddy who used to work in private security. Let them come. Let them push. My boots were planted. The gate wasn't moving. I never liked the quiet too much after a threat. You know that kind of silence where it feels like something's watching you, even if it's just the air pretending it forgot your name? That's what settled in after the HOA goons walked off my property. They disappeared, sure, but I could smell the strategy fermenting in their boardroom. These people weren't used to being told no. They were used to leash laws, lawn heights, and neighborhood pride awards. Not locked gates and barbed words. So I got proactive. I upgraded my cameras, thermal, night vision, the works. Pulled them from a military surplus contact I hadn't spoken to since the service. Wired everything into a closed-loop system with backups that uploaded to cloud storage every 30 minutes. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared, and it paid off. 3 nights after the encounter at the gate, around 2:30 in the morning, one of the eastern cameras pinged my phone. Motion detected. I opened the feed and squinted at 2 figures moving along the fence line. They were dressed in black, one with a flashlight, the other carrying what looked like a small toolkit. Their posture screamed, "I don't belong here," and their timing was all wrong for anything legal. I sat up, slipped on my boots, and grabbed my jacket. On the way out, I activated the silent alarm and triggered the secondary lighting. Soft beams, enough to illuminate the front gate without alerting them that I was watching. They were messing with the lock. I watched from a distance, concealed behind the tractor shed, as one of them pulled out what looked like a battery-powered grinder. The lock was triple-reinforced steel, custom-welded with armored shielding. They wouldn't get far, but the attempt was enough. Then came the twist. The guy with the grinder paused to hand over a piece of paper. His partner unfolded it. Looked like an official court order. I didn't need a closer look to know it was fake. Nothing comes through proper channels at 2:30 in the damn morning. That, and the guy holding the document, had a badge clipped to his vest that read Riverbend Enforcement Officer, which, to be clear, is not a real title. It's HOA cosplay. Right on cue, red and blue lights split the horizon. Sheriff's deputies rolled in faster than I expected. The moment they saw the sparks flying from my gate, they hit the floodlights and barked orders over the speaker. Both intruders froze. Grinder Boy dropped his tool and raised his hands. The other one tried to run. Didn't get far. They were cuffed on the ground when I stepped into the light. "Evening, gentlemen," I said, nodding to the deputy. He raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Schultz? This happen often?" "Only when the HOA gets creative," I said. Turned out one of the guys, Grinder Boy, wasn't just some night owl contractor. He was a former property inspector who lost his license 2 years ago for falsifying reports. The court order in his folder was a bad photocopy of a real form with forged signatures and a fake notary stamp. He claimed he was contracted by the Riverbend Association for expedited compliance operations. Sounds like something scraped off the bottom of a corporate shoe. The deputies arrested him on the spot for trespassing, destruction of private property, and attempted forgery. The other guy got off lighter, accessory to stupidity, basically. I handed over the security footage, clean audio, night vision, and all. My cameras even caught them rehearsing the scene, talking about how long it would take, how much Karen had promised to cover their liability. That's when the game changed. Within 24 hours, I had my lawyer file an official complaint against the Riverbend HOA and its president, Karen Sterling. Charges included criminal trespass, attempted unauthorized entry, document forgery, and conspiracy to defraud a property owner. We attached the footage, the false badge, and a notarized transcript of the suspect's statement to the police, where he openly said, "She told us it was just a formality." Of course, the HOA issued a press release the next day. The Riverbend Homeowners Association distances itself from the unlawful actions of an independent contractor. We are shocked and disappointed. We fully support the legal process and will cooperate with all investigations. Translation: we didn't think he'd get caught. I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't backing down either. By the end of the week, their little smear campaign had escalated. Someone registered a website, SaveRiverbendAccess.org. It featured my name in bold font, accusations that I was holding the community hostage, and even a manipulated photo of my workshop gate with crime scene tape photoshopped onto it. They were trying to make me look like some doomsday nut job. What they didn't expect was for my buddy Jake, former cyber analyst, to track the site's registration back to one of Karen's pet tech consultants. Same IP address linked to the HOA's official newsletter servers. Sloppy, predictable, traceable. I took screenshots, logged everything, and prepped a formal digital defamation complaint. By this point, I had a war chest of evidence and more cameras than a casino. The HOA wanted to play dirty. Fine, I had shovels. I was on my second cup of coffee and elbow deep in the guts of an old Massey Ferguson when I heard the sound. You know that slow, heavy crunch. Rubber on gravel, accompanied by a low diesel hum that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. Not a pickup. Not a delivery. This was something bigger. I stepped out from the side of the barn, and there it was. An excavator, bright yellow and humming like a mechanical wasp, crawling down the far end of the Riverbend side. It rolled right up to the edge of my property line, where my eastern fence met the dried creek bed. Right up to the part of the fence I hadn't reinforced yet. I'd been meaning to replace that section. Guess I took too long. There were men in reflective vests marking the ground, driving orange flags into the dirt. One of them had a clipboard. Another had a can of fluorescent spray paint. None of them were familiar. None of them belonged. I approached, not slowly. The guy with the clipboard turned when he saw me coming. "You lost?" I asked, arms folded. "Morning, sir. We're just prepping for a temporary access lane. Only surface grading. Nothing structural." "On whose authority?" He looked at his clipboard like it might have grown a judge's seal. "Per community project management directives, temporary equipment route." "That's funny," I said, "because that land belongs to me, and no one gave me a damn thing to sign." "Sir, we were told this was pre-approved." "By who? Karen?" The guy shifted on his feet. "I don't know any Karen." "Bullshit." I stepped forward, hand resting on my belt, not on a weapon, just posture. That's when one of the crew behind him motioned toward the machine. "You want us to go ahead with the first cut?" "No," I snapped. "You so much as scratch that fence, and I promise I'll have every one of you in court by Tuesday." The guy with the paint can tried to act like he didn't hear me. He knelt and sprayed a bright orange X on the ground, right at the post line. My post. That was it. I didn't yell. I didn't get dramatic. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff again. Then I called the county zoning office and demanded to speak with the inspector. While I waited, I filmed everything. The excavator idling, the flags, the paint, the crew. When the deputy arrived, I handed over the footage and walked him to the flagged area. He raised an eyebrow. These guys got a permit? Nope. Survey markers? Nope. The county inspector showed up 45 minutes later and confirmed it. No permits, no submitted plans, no authorization to disturb the ground. It was as illegal as a Sunday moonshine still. The workers backed off pretty quick once badges started flashing. But the damage was done. Not physical, but procedural. This wasn't just trespass. This was a coordinated attempt to push my boundaries under the radar. But it got better. That afternoon, my lawyer got word from the courthouse. The Riverbend HOA had filed an official motion with the district court requesting a temporary easement on my property. Their claim? For the benefit of emergency access, public utility transport, and construction logistics. It read like a page out of some bureaucratic horror novel. They cited public interest, community infrastructure necessity, and even threw in a paragraph about fire lane continuity. It was a bold move, and desperate. I didn't wait. I sent my lawyer everything. My title, my grandfather's land survey from 1967, the current plat map, and a scan of the original Riverbend contract that explicitly stated, in small but legally binding print, southern ingress and egress, not guaranteed or implied. I also added a thumb drive with video footage of their hired hands trying to bulldoze my fence. Not metaphorically, literally. The HOA didn't respond directly, of course. They don't talk to people. They talk through forms, memos, and PR. But that night, I noticed something strange. Someone had taken down the Save Riverbend Access website. The domain redirected to a blank page. No apology, no retraction, just gone. That kind of silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. They were regrouping. And next stop? Court. It started with signs, not official-looking ones. These were homemade. Poster boards stapled to stakes, jammed into the ground just outside my fence line. Let us through. Emergency access saves lives. And my personal favorite, share the road, Solts. They popped up overnight like weeds after a rainstorm. Neon markers, childish handwriting, slogans that sounded like they came from a fifth-grade civics project. By morning, there were people too. Not a crowd, but enough to call it a gathering. A dozen or so residents from Riverbend, all gathered at the edge of my property. They stood just far enough back to avoid trespassing charges, holding signs, drinking coffee from thermoses, waving at passing cars like this was some kind of local protest worth honking for. I watched them from the edge of my workshop, arms crossed, chewing a piece of jerky like it was a cigar. Part of me wanted to laugh. This wasn't Washington. This was rural Texas. But then again, the HOA wasn't interested in comedy. They were interested in optics. They wanted pictures, headlines, videos of an old man yelling from behind a gate. And I wasn't about to give them that. I stayed back. Let the cameras film nothing but an empty driveway and a locked gate. But then, around midday, the man showed up. He didn't look like the others. Didn't fit the retirement village aesthetic. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, wearing jeans and a polo shirt 2 sizes too tight, with a ball cap pulled low. He walked straight up to the gate like he owned it, stepped a little too close, and started taking pictures. I walked out slow, hands visible, relaxed posture. My GoPro was already recording from my helmet cam. I'd started wearing it around the property as a precaution. Just in case. "Can I help you?" I asked. He didn't answer. Just snapped another photo, this time of my face. I repeated the question, a little firmer. That's when he got loud. "You, the land grabber?" he shouted. "The guy who won't let ambulances through? The guy blocking progress for the whole damn neighborhood?" I didn't move. "This is private property. You're on the easement line. Step back." He stepped closer instead. What are you hiding behind those fences, huh? Meth lab? Illegal workshop? Just a bitter old vet with a bunker full of paranoia? I let him talk. The camera was still rolling. Then he took a swing. Not a real punch, more like a theatrical swipe at my shoulder. His fingers barely brushed my jacket, but the man dropped to the ground like I'd hit him with a 2x4. He started hollering, clutching his face, shouting, "He hit me! He attacked me! Call the cops!" The crowd rushed over. Phones came out. One woman gasped and shouted, "Oh my God, did you see that?" Another said, "That's assault." I didn't say a word, just stood there and tapped the side of my helmet cam. A little red light blinked right above my right eye. The sheriff arrived less than 10 minutes later. Same deputy as before. Miller, young guy with a cool head. He started asking questions. The victim kept up the act, holding a tissue to his nose even though there wasn't a drop of blood. Said I attacked him without provocation. "Want to press charges?" the deputy asked him. "Damn right I do," the guy spat. "He assaulted me on camera." "Great," I said. "Let's take a look." I handed over the memory card from my GoPro and offered to pull the footage from my gate camera too, just for good measure. The deputy watched the video on his patrol tablet, silent. Then he replayed it, slower. The man wasn't touched, not even grazed. And just before he threw himself to the dirt, he looked around like he was checking to make sure someone was watching. Deputy Miller sighed. "Sir, you want to change your statement?" The man hesitated, then shrugged. "Fine. Maybe it wasn't that bad, but he was aggressive." "You're done," Miller said, snapping cuffs around his wrists. "Filing a false report. Attempted fraud. Get in the truck." As they drove off, the crowd started to thin. Some of the protesters awkwardly folded up their signs. One of the women muttered, "I didn't know they were gonna do that," before shuffling back toward her SUV. The next morning, I received an anonymous email with a screen cap from a group chat titled Riverbend Access Coordination. In it, someone named Karen's sent a message 2 days prior. "We need a confrontation. If he so much as raises his voice, we can escalate to civil complaint." Attached was a payment receipt from a cash app, $500, labeled appearance fee. I printed it out and handed it straight to my lawyer. They thought they could provoke me into overreacting, but they didn't realize the difference between aggression and control. They came to throw a punch. I came with a camera. By the end of that week, I'd been called a public hazard, a selfish land baron, and, my personal favorite, a safety obstructionist. All by people who'd never even walked within 100 feet of my fence. The HOA's smear machine hadn't just painted me as a villain. They'd handed out brushes to anyone with a Facebook account and a strong opinion about gates. And yet, the crowd had gone quiet after the staged assault failed. No more chanting retirees, no fresh signs. But the damage lingered. Riverbend was whispering. The local news did a segment with grainy B-roll of my gate and a voiceover asking, "What's more important, private rights or public safety?" Cute. I realized if I didn't control the narrative, they'd keep feeding the town their version of who I was. A paranoid loner clinging to barbed wire and war trauma. So I did something I swore I'd never do. I opened the gate. Not for them, for everyone else. I called a few local reporters, ones I trusted not to twist my words into clickbait. Sent out a short email. "I'll be hosting a community transparency day at my property this Saturday. All are welcome. Press included. Bring questions." The HOA didn't respond directly, but I could feel their panic by how fast their Access Now Facebook group went quiet. Saturday rolled in hot and windy. I had 2 pop-up tents set up in the gravel drive, one with a table covered in documentation, title history, maps, tax records, zoning letters, I even laminated copies of the Riverbend buyer's agreement with the clause about no guaranteed southern access highlighted in orange. I gave the other tent to my mechanic apprentices. They set up shop and offered free mower blade sharpening to anyone who brought equipment. Made it feel less like a political stunt and more like a small-town community fair. People came. Not a lot at first. Mostly curious older couples and a few dads with strollers. Then came the reporters. I walked them through the property boundaries, showed them where Riverbend's fence butted up against mine, pointed to the repaired section where the excavator had tried to get cute. I explained the history of the road, how my grandfather had carved it by hand with a rented grader in 1967. Showed them the aerial photos over the decades. When they asked why I was fighting so hard, I told them the truth. This isn't about a road. This is about consent, about control. If they wanted access, they should have planned for it, not tried to take it. Some nodded, some didn't. But none of them walked away thinking I was some deranged isolationist. I wasn't waving a rifle. I was handing out cold water and talking like a man who still believed in lines that shouldn't be crossed. By late afternoon, the vibe had shifted. I noticed a man lingering near the documentation table. Late 30s, pressed khakis, HOA name tag flipped backward. When I approached, he turned it over himself. Tyler Manning, community treasurer. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said, not unfriendly. "I didn't come as a board member," he replied. "I came as a homeowner. I've lived in Riverbend 2 years. I didn't sign up for this war." He glanced at the documents, then at the laminated HOA map I'd posted. "Did you know Karen told us this road was negotiated and pending approval back in February?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's a hell of a rewrite of rejected repeatedly." He exhaled, shaking his head. "Some of us are starting to realize this isn't about access anymore. It's about pride and cover-ups." Before he left, he slid a folded envelope onto the table. Inside were screenshots, emails, meeting notes from closed HOA sessions. One line stood out, highlighted in red. "We can outlast him legally. Even if we're in the wrong, the pressure will make him cave." I didn't smile, but something in my chest settled. That night, a local news station aired a segment titled "Gatekeeper or Scapegoat: Inside the Salt's Land Dispute." The reporter closed with a line I hadn't expected. Sometimes, defense of the law doesn't come with a badge. Sometimes, it comes with a locked gate, a dusty driveway, and a paper trail. The emails from strangers started coming in the next day. Some supportive, a few angry, but most were curious. Real questions, not accusations. People who wanted to understand, not condemn. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt something shift. Not in the fence, in the wind. I've never liked courtrooms. They remind me too much of briefings, sterile, hushed places full of men in suits, pretending to be reasonable while sharpening knives behind their backs. But that morning, walking into the Travis County Courthouse in my best-pressed shirt and cleanest boots, I wasn't nervous. I was loaded for bear. Karen Sterling, on the other hand, looked like a woman who hadn't slept in a week. Her legal team flanked her like buzzards in matching navy blazers. She didn't look at me when I passed, though I caught the way her jaw tightened. Behind her, Tyler Manning, the HOA treasurer who'd given me the emails, sat 2 rows back, hands folded, eyes steady. He nodded once. I nodded back. The hearing was supposed to be simple. Riverbend HOA petitioning for a temporary access easement on my land, claiming it was critical for community safety and utility routing. They presented aerial maps, a few manipulated photos showing hypothetical emergency scenarios, and one hired expert who claimed my gate would add minutes to an ambulance route. Then it was our turn. My lawyer, Miss Davis, opened with quiet fire. She handed over my deed, the original property plat, and a historical record of taxes paid on that private road going back 55 years. She showed photos of the damaged fence from the excavator stunt, then played the video of the nighttime break-in, complete with forged order and fake enforcement badge. The judge's brow arched at that one. Then she handed over the HOA buyer's agreement. Yes, the one with the line in black and white. Southern ingress and egress not guaranteed. Then came the real hit, an affidavit signed by Tyler, confirming Karen had misrepresented that clause to new buyers and knowingly withheld HOA votes related to the easement from the full board. We submitted screenshots of emails suggesting deliberate harassment and the payment made to the actor who faked the assault on me. When the judge saw the email from Karen that read, "We can outlast him. He'll fold when the heat gets high enough," she leaned back and exhaled through her nose. That's the legal equivalent of a thunderclap. Karen's lawyer tried to argue that none of it mattered, that the HOA still had a civic right to emergency access, but the judge didn't buy it. She ruled that the HOA had no legal entitlement to my land, temporary or otherwise. Their actions constituted coordinated harassment, with elements of fraud, document tampering, and incitement. The request for easement was denied with prejudice. Then, unexpectedly, the judge referred the entire case to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges against Karen and unnamed members of the HOA board. As we walked out, one of the younger board members trailed after me in the hallway. "I didn't know it got that far," he said. "We just thought we were being persistent." I looked him in the eye. There's a line between persistence and siege warfare. Your boss crossed it. Outside, the air felt lighter, clean, but I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. You'd think after the court ruling, they'd crawl back into their HOA meeting room and lick their wounds. But not Karen. 2 days later, the news broke like a shotgun blast. The county audit, fast-tracked thanks to Tyler's cooperation, revealed that over $200,000 of Riverbend's community funds had been funneled into legal initiatives, including payments to consultants, private compliance contractors, and one suspicious invoice simply labeled Resolution Strategy. More than half of those expenses traced back to her direct authorization. No vote, no notice, no paper trail that couldn't be, unraveled with a black light and a little curiosity. Several residents, including a few who'd waved signs outside my fence weeks earlier, filed formal complaints. Within 48 hours, Karen Sterling was placed under investigation for fraud, conspiracy to commit trespass, and misappropriation of HOA funds. She was arrested at her home 3 days later. They showed it on the news. Her in cuffs, her manicured hand covering her face as the HOA sign behind her fluttered in the breeze. Not the ending she planned, I imagine. Riverbend's HOA was stripped of its license 2 weeks after that. The state appointed a temporary overseer until a new board could be elected. Tyler, to no one's surprise, declined the nomination. As for me, I poured fresh concrete along the eastern edge of the fence, set in anchor-grade steel bollards that looked like they could stop a tank. I added solar lights, security beacons, and a hand-painted sign right at the gate. No trespassing. Private land. Trespassers will be prosecuted. HOA is not the law. A local metal shop even made me a second version, with gold trim and a little smug glint. People still stop by sometimes. Neighbors I hadn't met before. Some bring pie. Others bring questions. Most just say, "Sorry we believed them." I don't hold grudges, but my gate stays closed.